The woman on the auction block wasn't supposed to survive this. Hands bound, sack over her head, she stood while men laughed and placed bets on how long before she broke. When they ripped the fabric away, the jeers got louder. Her body was their punchline, her worth measured in cruelty. But one man didn't laugh. Colt Rayner saw what they couldn't, defiance burning behind her eyes. What he did next would start a war neither of them expected. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The wind cut through Cedar Ridge like a blade looking for skin. Colt Rayner felt it through his worn leather coat as he guided his horse down the main street, the animal's breath forming white clouds in the October air. He'd come for supplies. Salt, ammunition, maybe a new axe handle if the general store had one worth buying. What he hadn't come for was the crowd gathered in the town square, their voices carrying that particular pitch of excitement people get when they're watching something ugly unfold. He should have kept riding, should have minded his own business, and headed straight for Henderson's store. But Colt had always been cursed with curiosity, the kind that got trappers killed when they investigated strange tracks or unusual silence in the woods. So he slowed his horse and moved toward the edge of the crowd, trying to see what had drawn maybe 40 people out into the cold. The platform stood in the center of the square, hastily built from pine boards that still wept sap. On it, a man Colt recognized as Dutch Mercer, a cattle hand who worked for Victor Hale's operation, was addressing the crowd with the practiced enthusiasm of a carnival barker. "Now, I know what you're all thinking," Dutch called out, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation. "You're thinking, Dutch, why should I spend good money on damaged goods?" And that's a fair question, gentlemen. A fair question indeed. Colt's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going before Dutch even gestured to the figure standing behind him on the platform. The woman stood with her hands bound in front of her, a burlap sack pulled over her head. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days, the fabric straining across broad shoulders and a full figure. Even with her face covered, Colt could see the tension in her posture. Not the collapse of defeat, but something held rigid, controlled. "But hear me out," Dutch continued, warming to his pitch. "Every ranch needs someone who can handle the heavy work. Am I right? Someone strong enough to haul water, chop wood, handle the kind of labor that breaks the backs of smaller women. And this one here? Well, she's built for it. I'll tell you that much." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A man near Colt elbowed his companion. "Built like a damn ox, more like." Dutch grinned at the response. Now, Mr. Hale acquired this one through a legitimate debt contract. Her family owed, and she was collateral. He gave her honest work for 6 months, treated her fair and square. But the thing is, gentlemen, she proved to be difficult, stubborn, wouldn't follow simple instructions, always had something to say back. Mr. Hale's a patient man, but even he has his limits. "So he's dumping his problems on us?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Not dumping, friend. Offering an opportunity. She can work hard when she wants to. That's not in question. She just needs the right handler. Someone with a firm hand who can break her of these bad habits." Colt's fingers curled around his reins. The way Dutch talked about the woman, like she was a horse that needed breaking, made something cold settle in his gut. "How much?" a voice called out. Colt couldn't see who'd spoken. Dutch's grin widened. "Well, now we're getting to it. Given the circumstances, Mr. Hale is willing to be very reasonable. Shall we start at $5? Silence fell over the crowd. $5 was nothing for a contract, even a difficult one. The silence stretched long enough that Dutch's smile began to falter. "Come now, gentlemen. $5 for a strong worker? That's less than you'd pay for a decent plow horse." "Yeah, but a horse don't talk back," someone muttered, and more laughter followed. Dutch's face hardened slightly. "Fine. $3. And that's practically giving her away." Still, no one moved to bid. Colt watched the crowd, saw the mix of amusement and disgust on their faces. This wasn't about the money. This was about humiliation, putting this woman on display, making sure everyone in Cedar Ridge knew she'd been rejected, found wanting, cast aside. "All right," Dutch said, his voice taking on an edge. "Let's see what we're working with here. Maybe you boys need a better look to appreciate the value." He moved behind the woman and grabbed the burlap sack. She flinched, the first real movement Colt had seen from her, but didn't pull away. Dutch yanked the sack off with theatrical flair. The woman who stood revealed had dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, loose strands escaping to frame a face that was all sharp angles and set jaw. Her eyes were a startling gray-green, and they swept across the crowd with something that looked less like shame and more like barely contained fury. She was perhaps 25, with the kind of face that might have been called handsome rather than pretty. Strong features, a nose that had maybe been broken once, a mouth pressed into a thin line. But it was her body that drew the crowd's reaction. She was tall, taller than Dutch by a couple of inches, with broad shoulders and thick arms that spoke of genuine strength. Her waist was thick, her hips wide, her whole frame carrying the kind of weight that small-minded people equated with worthlessness. The laughter started immediately. "Christ almighty," someone wheezed. "No wonder Hale wants to be rid of her." "I've seen breeding sows with better figures." $3? I wouldn't take her if she came with a gold nugget. The woman's face didn't change. She kept her eyes fixed on some point above the crowd's heads, her breathing steady, her spine straight. But Colt saw the way her bound hands trembled slightly, the only betrayal of what this cost her. Dutch held up his hands for quiet, though he was grinning now. Now, she's not much to look at, I'll grant you. But like I said, she's strong. Put her in the barn or the kitchen, you won't have to look at her much anyway, will you? More laughter. A woman in the crowd, one of the town's respectable matrons, whispered something to her neighbor, both of them looking at the platform with identical expressions of disdain. $2, Dutch announced. My final offer, gentlemen. $2 for a contract that's got 4 months left on it. That's honest labor for practically nothing. The crowd had started to disperse, the entertainment value clearly outweighing any practical interest. A few men lingered, but more out of morbid curiosity than genuine intent to bid. Dutch's face was reddening now, his humiliation almost matching the woman's. Fine. $1, one goddamn dollar, and she's yours, contract and all. Colt felt something snap inside him, not dramatically, not like a revelation. It was quieter than that. Just a simple recognition that if he rode away now, he'd carry the memory of this woman's face for the rest of his life. The way she stood tall while they tore her apart, the trembling in her hands that no one else seemed to notice, the fury in her eyes that she kept locked down tight because showing it would only make things worse. He'd spent most of his 32 years alone in the mountains, trapping beaver and marten, avoiding exactly the kind of complications that came from getting involved in other people's business. He had enough for winter, barely, and spending money on anything other than essentials was foolish at best, potentially fatal at worst. But there were some things a man couldn't walk away from and still call himself a man. Colt urged his horse forward through the crowd. People stepped aside, recognizing him vaguely. The trapper who came to town maybe 4 times a year, who kept to himself and didn't cause trouble. He rode right up to the platform and looked Dutch in the eye. I'll take her. Dutch blinked, clearly surprised. You will? $1, you said, contract and all. The crowd had gone quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Confusion, maybe. Curiosity. Colt could feel their eyes on him, could already hear the gossip that would follow. Well, damn, Dutch said, recovering quickly. Looks like we have ourselves a buyer after all. He turned to the woman, who was now looking at Colt with an expression he couldn't quite read. You hear that? You're lucky after all. This gentleman's willing to take you on. I'll need to see the contract, Colt said, dismounting. Make sure it's legitimate. Dutch's eyes narrowed slightly. You questioning Mr. Hale's business practices? I'm making sure I know what I'm buying. That's just common sense. For a moment it looked like Dutch might argue. Then he shrugged and pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Suit yourself. It's all legal and binding. Colt took the document and scanned it quickly. It was indeed a debt contract. Rhea Vance, aged 24, indentured for 12 months to settle a family debt of $37. 8 months completed, 4 remaining. The terms were standard for such arrangements, though Colt had never liked the practice. Too easy for unscrupulous men to trap desperate people in permanent servitude through interest and additional expenses. This says her family's debt was $37, Colt said. You're selling her contract for $1? Dutch shrugged. Mr. Hale's already written it off as a loss. He just wants her gone. You're doing him a favor, really. Colt looked at the woman, Rhea Vance. She was watching him now, those gray-green eyes sharp and assessing, trying to figure out what kind of man would buy her contract, whether she was walking out of one nightmare into another. Fair question. He pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and flipped it to Dutch, who caught it with a satisfied grin. Pleasure doing business with you, friend. She's all yours now. I'll need that in writing, Colt said. A bill of sale or transfer. Something that shows the contract's been legally transferred to me. Dutch's grin faltered. That's not really... I'm not taking her anywhere until I have proper documentation, unless you want me to ride out to Hale's ranch and ask him directly. The threat was mild, but it landed. Dutch clearly didn't want Colt anywhere near Victor Hale, probably because Hale hadn't actually authorized this little auction. This had been Dutch's idea, a way to humiliate someone who'd crossed his employer while maybe making a few dollars on the side. Fine, Dutch muttered. He pulled out a stub of pencil and scrawled a few lines on the back of the contract. There. Transfer of contract from Victor Hale to... What's your name? Colt Rayner. Dutch wrote it down and signed with a flourish. Satisfied? Colt took the paper, folded it, and tucked it inside his coat. Then he stepped up onto the platform and pulled his knife from his belt. Rhea Vance went very still, her eyes fixed on the blade. Easy, Colt said quietly, positioning himself so the crowd couldn't see what he was doing. I'm just cutting those ropes. He sliced through the bindings on her wrists with quick efficiency, then stepped back as she brought her hands forward, rubbing at the raw marks where the hemp had bitten into her skin. You can ride? He asked. She nodded, not speaking. There's a horse tied up outside Henderson's store. Brown mare with a white blaze. That yours? Another nod. Get her and meet me at the north edge of town. We're leaving. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or disbelief. Just like that? Her voice was lower than he'd expected, rough around the edges like she hadn't used it much lately. Just like that, he confirmed, unless you'd rather stay here and see if anyone else wants to make an offer. That got a reaction, a flash of something raw crossing her face before she locked it down again. I'll get my horse. She moved to step off the platform, but Dutch grabbed her arm. Now hold on. She's got belongings back at let go of her, Colt said, his voice flat. Dutch looked at him, seemed to calculate the odds, and released her arm. Fine, but don't come crying when you figure out what a mistake you've made. Rhea Vance walked through the crowd with her head up, ignoring the stares and whispered comments. Colt watched her go, then turned back to Dutch. You tell Hale that the contract's been fulfilled. She's my responsibility now, and he's got no further claim on her or her family. You think he'll just accept that? Colt smiled, though there wasn't much warmth in it. I think he's a smart enough businessman to know when to cut his losses. And if he's not, well, I'm not hard to find. He left Dutch standing on the platform and made his way back to his horse. The crowd was breaking up properly now, the show over. Some people were heading into the general store, others toward the saloon. A few lingered to gossip, casting glances between Colt and the retreating figure of Rhea Vance. Colt ignored them all. He'd learned long ago that people would think what they wanted to think, and trying to explain yourself just gave them more ammunition. Let them gossip. He'd be back in the mountains by nightfall, and their opinions wouldn't follow him there. He rode slowly toward the north end of town, giving Rhea time to collect her horse. His own supplies could wait. Henderson's store would still be there next month, and he had enough salt and ammunition to last a while longer. What he needed now was distance between himself and Cedar Ridge before anyone had second thoughts about the transaction. Rhea was waiting where he'd told her to wait, sitting astride a tired-looking mare that had seen better days. She'd retrieved a battered pack that now hung from her saddle horn, everything she owned in the world, probably. You ready? Colt asked, pulling up alongside her. Where are we going? My cabin, about 8 miles into the mountains. It's remote. Closest neighbor is a day's ride away. You'll have privacy, at least. She studied him with those sharp eyes. And what exactly do you expect from me, in exchange for buying that contract? It was a fair question, asked in a tone that suggested she'd already braced herself for the worst answer. I expect you to work, Colt said bluntly. Same as I do. There's plenty to do before winter sets in hard, firewood to split, meat to smoke, cabin to winterize. I live alone, and I'm behind on preparations. You help me get through the winter, come spring the contract's done, and you're free to go wherever you want. That's it? That's it. She didn't look convinced. Men don't usually spend money without expecting something else. Colt met her gaze steadily. I'm not most men, and I'm not interested in forcing anyone to do anything they don't want to do. You'll have your own space in the cabin. You'll work hard but fairly, and when spring comes, you'll walk away free and clear. That's the deal. Rhea Vance looked at him for a long moment, and Colt had the unsettling feeling of being thoroughly assessed, weighed, measured, and judged by someone who'd learned not to trust easy promises. Finally, she nodded. All right, let's go. They rode north out of Cedar Ridge, leaving the whispers and stares behind them. The road quickly narrowed to a trail, and the trail eventually faded into wilderness. Colt led them higher into the mountains, following paths only he knew, marked by blazes on trees and the particular arrangement of rocks that meant something to someone who knew how to read them. They rode in silence for the first hour. Colt didn't mind. He was used to quiet, and he figured Rhea had enough to process without him filling the air with pointless conversation. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. It was Rhea who finally broke the silence. Why did you do it? Colt glanced back at her. Do what? Buy my contract. You didn't know me. Didn't know if I could actually work or if I'd just be a burden. But you spent your money anyway. She paused. That was your money, wasn't it? Not just $1 you had lying around. He turned his attention back to the trail. It was my money. How much did you have before you spent it on me? Enough. That's not an answer. Colt sighed. I had $3 in change. Enough for the supplies I needed and a little left over. Now I've got $2 in change, which means I'll have to be more careful about what I buy. But I'll manage. He heard her breath catch slightly. You spent 1/3 of your money on a stranger. I spent $1 on stopping something I couldn't stomach watching. There's a difference. They rode in silence for another stretch. The trail grew steeper, winding between outcroppings of granite and stands of aspen that had already dropped their leaves. Winter would come early this year. Colt could feel it in the air, in the way the animals were behaving, in the particular quality of the light. My name's Rhea, she said eventually. Rhea Vance. I guess you saw that on the contract. Colt Rayner, though I guess you heard that part. Colt like the gun or the horse? Like the young horse. My mother had a sense of humor. He thought he heard a small sound that might have been a laugh, quickly stifled. Can I ask you something else? Rhea said. Seems like you're going to whether I say yes or not. When Dutch pulled that sack off my head and everyone started laughing, you didn't laugh. Why not? Colt considered the question. He could give her an easy answer, something noble-sounding about respect and decency. But she'd asked honestly, and she deserved honesty in return. My mother was a big woman, he said finally. Strong, like you. She could outwork most men, and she raised me on her own after my father died. She got the same looks you probably got your whole life, people judging her worth by her size instead of her character. I saw what that did to her, how it wore her down year after year until she started believing what they said about her. He paused, remembering. I was 14 when she died. Influenza. And I remember thinking how unfair it was that she'd spent her whole life being made to feel less than, when she was worth more than all of them combined. Rhea didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. What was her name? Margaret, Maggie, to people she liked. She raised a good son. She raised a stubborn one. Whether that's good remains to be seen. They climbed higher. The air grew thinner, colder. Colt could see his breath now, and the sun was starting its descent toward the western peaks. They'd need to reach the cabin before full dark. These mountains weren't forgiving to those caught out at night without shelter. Tell me about Hale, Colt said. The contract said your family owed him money. How'd that happen? Rhea's voice hardened. My father borrowed money to buy seed for the spring planting. $37. Hale said he'd loan it at reasonable interest, and my father trusted him because he'd been doing business with Hale for years. What my father didn't know was that Hale had changed the terms. Instead of the 5% they'd agreed on, the actual contract said 20% compounding monthly. Colt whistled low. That's not a loan, that's a trap. That's exactly what it was. By harvest time, my father owed over $60. He couldn't pay, and Hale knew it. He said he'd forgive the debt if I came to work for him for a year. Said I'd be helping with household work, cooking, cleaning. My father agreed because he didn't have a choice. Let me guess, it wasn't household work. First week, Hale tried to get me into his bed, told me that was part of my duties, that the contract gave him rights over me. I told him to go to hell. There was grim satisfaction in her voice. He didn't like that, so he sent me to work in the barns instead, doing the heaviest labor he could find, hauling manure, moving hay bales, breaking ice on water troughs in the middle of winter, trying to break me. Did it work? No. I'm stronger than he gave me credit for. I did the work, every bit of it, and I did it well. That made him angrier. He started looking for reasons to extend the contract, charging me for food, for housing, for the clothes I wore, adding on months for every invented infraction. Colt's hands tightened on his reins. That's illegal. Maybe. But who was I going to complain to? The sheriff's in Hale's pocket. The judge comes from the same social circle. I'm nobody, Colt, a big girl from a poor family with no connections and no money. The law doesn't protect people like me. She was right, and they both knew it. So what happened? Why the auction today? Rhea was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, there was steel in her voice. Hale kept pushing, kept trying to force me into situations where I'd have to submit or face consequences. 2 weeks ago, he cornered me in the barn, told me that if I didn't stop being so stubborn, he'd find ways to make things very difficult for my family. My sister Anna, she's 17, still at home with my parents. Colt could guess where this was going. He said maybe Anna would be more agreeable than me, more willing to fulfill certain obligations, that maybe he should transfer my debt to her instead. Son of a bitch. I hit him, Rhea said flatly. Broke his nose. Probably would have done worse if his men hadn't pulled me off. He had them lock me in the root cellar for 3 days while he decided what to do with me. When he finally let me out, he said I'd violated the contract by assaulting him. Said he had every right to sell my contract to whoever would take it, and that if I made trouble, he'd make sure Anna ended up in my place. They'd reached a narrow passage between 2 rock faces. Colt led them through single file, waiting until they emerged on the other side before speaking again. Your sister, is she safe? For now. Hale won't move on her immediately. He'll wait to see what I do, whether I cause problems for him. If I disappear quietly, he'll probably leave my family alone. She paused. That's why I didn't fight the auction, why I let Dutch put that sack over my head and parade me around like livestock, because fighting back would put Anna in danger. Colt understood. The world was full of men like Victor Hale, men who used power and money to trap people in impossible situations, who counted on desperation and fear to keep their victims compliant. And the law did nothing because the law was written by and for men like Hale. Does your family know where you are? He asked. No, I couldn't get word to them. For all they know, I'm still at Hale's ranch or dead in a ditch somewhere. We'll fix that. Once we're settled at the cabin, I'll ride back down and get a message to them. Let them know you're safe. And Hale? When he finds out where I went? That's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. But out here, I'm not so easy to intimidate. And I'd like to see him try to enforce a contract that he sold for $1. Rhea made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something more bitter. You don't know him. He doesn't let go of things. He'll see this as a challenge to his authority. Then I guess he'll learn that authority doesn't mean much when you're 8 miles into the mountains facing someone who knows how to survive out here. They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. The temperature dropped steadily, and Colt could feel the promise of snow in the air. Another week, maybe 2, and the first storm would hit. They needed to be ready. The cabin finally came into view as they rounded a bend in the trail. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine and spruce, a sturdy structure built from hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A lean-to stable stood to one side, big enough for the horses and Colt's pack mule. A stream ran nearby, its water clear and cold. It wasn't much, but it was home. "Welcome to paradise," Colt said dryly, dismounting. "I know it's not fancy, but it's warm and dry, which is more than you can say for most places up here." Rhea slid off her horse, moving stiffly. The ride had been long, and Colt noticed her rubbing her lower back as she looked around the clearing. "It's quiet," she said. "That's the point. Come on, I'll show you inside and get a fire going. You must be frozen." The cabin's interior was simple. One main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in one corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. Colt's traps hung from pegs, along with his rifle and spare coat. Rhea stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "You said I'd have my own space." "You will. I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horses for now. You take the bed." "That's ridiculous. It's getting too cold for that. I've slept in worse conditions. Besides, I need to winterize the lean-to anyway. Add some insulation, seal up the gaps. Might as well do it now while I'm motivated." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was written across her face. The day had been long, the emotional toll even longer. "We'll figure it out," Colt said. "For tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we'll start planning how to get through the winter." He built up the fire while Rhea sank into one of the chairs, her eyes tracking his movements. Colt pulled out some dried venison and hardtack, adding a small pot of beans that had been soaking since morning. It wasn't much of a meal, but it would do. As the food warmed, he found himself acutely aware of the strangeness of the situation. He'd lived alone for nearly 3 years now, and before that, his companionship had been limited to other trappers who passed through. Having another person in his space felt foreign, uncomfortable in ways he hadn't anticipated. But when he glanced at Rhea and saw her hands still shaking slightly as she held them toward the fire, saw the shadows under her eyes and the tension she carried in her shoulders, he knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever complications this brought, they were better than the alternative of riding away and leaving her to Hale's revenge. "Here," he said, handing her a tin cup of beans and a piece of venison. "It's not fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." She took the food and ate mechanically, like someone who'd learned not to expect much from meals. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind beginning to pick up outside. When they'd finished, Rhea set down her cup and looked at him directly. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I'm not helpless. I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. What you did today, buying that contract, it gave me a chance I wouldn't have had otherwise, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm not going to be a burden. I pull my own weight. I always have. I never thought otherwise. And when spring comes and that contract's done, I'm leaving. I have plans, things I need to do. This is temporary. We clear on that?" "Crystal clear?" She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then we'll get along fine." Colt showed her where the blankets were stored, where to find water and the outhouse. He gathered his own bedroll and spare blanket, preparing to head out to the lean-to. "Colt," Rhea said as he reached the door. He turned back. "Thank you," she said simply, "for what you did today, for not laughing. You don't need to thank me." "Yeah," she said, "I do." He stepped out into the cold night air, closing the door behind him. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any town lights. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, and another answered. The mountains settling in for the night, ancient and indifferent to human drama. Colt made his way to the lean-to and spread his bedroll in the corner farthest from the horses. It was cold, but he'd slept in worse. He lay there thinking about Rhea Vance, about Victor Hale, about the choice he'd made and what it might cost him. But mostly, he thought about the way she'd stood on that platform, with her head held high while they tried to break her. The fury in her eyes that she'd kept locked down tight. The strength it took to endure that kind of humiliation and not shatter. His mother would have liked her, he thought, would have recognized in Rhea the same stubborn refusal to be defined by other people's judgments. Tomorrow they'd start the real work, preparing for winter, figuring out how to survive the months ahead. Tomorrow they'd have to think about Victor Hale and what he might do when he discovered where his former property had gone. But tonight, Colt had done something he could live with. He'd stood up when it mattered, and he'd given someone a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. In the mountains, where survival depended on making the right choices at the right moments, that felt like enough. For now. The first snow came 3 days after they arrived at the cabin, falling in thick, wet flakes that blanketed the clearing by mid-morning. Colt woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, steady, rhythmic strikes that spoke of someone who knew what they were doing. He pushed himself out of his bedroll, his breath fogging in the cold air of the lean-to. Through the gaps in the boards, he could see Rhea in the clearing, her back to him as she worked through the woodpile he'd been meaning to split for the past 2 weeks. She'd already gone through a quarter of it, the split logs stacked neatly to one side. He pulled on his boots and coat, then stepped out into the snow. "You know you don't have to prove anything on day 3. Rhea didn't stop swinging. "Not proving anything, just cold, and we need firewood." "I was going to get to it." "When? After the ground froze solid?" She brought the axe down, splitting a thick log cleanly in 2. "You've been sleeping in a half-finished lean-to for 3 nights because you gave me the cabin. Least I can do is make sure you don't freeze to death before spring." Colt watched her work for a moment. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of hard labor, no wasted motion. Her breath came out in white puffs, and sweat had already darkened the back of her shirt despite the cold. "You always this stubborn?" he asked. "Says the man who spent his last dollar on a stranger." She paused long enough to look at him. "We're both stubborn. Difference is, I know how to split wood." "Fair enough. I'll start working on breakfast." "Already ate. There's some cornmeal mush left if you want it." Colt went inside and found she'd not only made breakfast but had reorganized his shelves, sweeping out the corners and arranging his supplies in a way that actually made sense. The fire was built up properly, radiating heat throughout the small space. He ate the mush. It was better than anything he'd made in months, and tried not to feel unsettled by how quickly she'd made herself useful. He'd expected, well, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Maybe someone who needed time to recover, to adjust, not someone who woke up before dawn and started improving his entire living situation. By noon, they'd split enough wood to last a month. Rhea worked without complaint, hauling the split logs to the covered area beside the cabin where they'd stay dry. When Colt tried to take over the heavier work, she gave him a look that could have frozen the stream solid. "I'm not made of glass," she said. "I've been hauling hay bales that weigh more than you since I was 15. This is nothing. Didn't say you were made of glass, just thought you might want a break." "I'll break when the work's done." They worked side by side through the afternoon, and Colt found himself reassessing his initial plans. He'd figured on doing most of the heavy preparation himself while Rhea handled lighter tasks, cooking, mending, maybe helping with the easier chores. But watching her work, seeing the strength in her arms and back, he realized he'd underestimated her. Not because of her size, but because he'd fallen into the same trap as everyone else, assuming that someone who'd been beaten down would need time to recover before being useful. Rhea Vance wasn't interested in recovery time. She was interested in survival. When the sun started its descent behind the western peaks, they finally stopped. Colt's shoulders ached, and his hands were raw despite his calluses. Rhea looked tired but satisfied, surveying the stacked wood with the expression of someone who'd accomplished something real. "That should hold us for a while," she said. "More than a while. That's enough for 6 weeks. Easy." She nodded, brushing snow off her coat. "What's next?" "Next we eat. Then I need to finish winterizing the lean-to, and you need to not work yourself to death on your 4th day here." "I'm fine." "You're also human. Even the strongest people need rest." Rhea looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "The way other people look at me, what they assume." She gestured at herself, at her broad frame and thick arms. "You just see someone who can work, not someone who's too big, too masculine, too much." Colt shrugged. "I see someone who's strong. That's valuable up here. Everything else is just noise." "That simple for you?" "That simple." She smiled then, small, brief, but genuine. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it changed her whole face, made her look younger, less guarded. "All right then," she said, "let's eat." They fell into a rhythm over the next week. Rhea took over most of the cooking, which was fine by Colt, since his skills in that area ran toward functional but grim. She also reorganized his trapping equipment, mended clothes he'd been meaning to fix for months, and somehow made the cabin feel less like a temporary shelter and more like an actual home. In return, Colt taught her about the mountains. He showed her how to read the weather and the behavior of the birds, how to find game trails in the snow, how to move quietly through the forest. She absorbed it all with the focus of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival. They were checking his trapline on the 8th day when Rhea finally brought up her family. "You said you'd get a message to my parents," she said, stepping carefully over a fallen log. "I've been thinking about what to tell them. The truth seems like a good start." "The truth is complicated." She paused, scanning the trees ahead. "They'll want me to come home. And I can't, not while Hale still has leverage over Anna." "What kind of leverage?" Rhea's jaw tightened. "The debt contract didn't end when Hale sold me. He restructured it, transferred my remaining obligation to my father, with Anna as collateral if they can't pay. It's all legal, all documented. The sheriff witnessed the new terms." Colt felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When did this happen?" "The day before the auction. Hale's insurance policy, I guess, making sure I couldn't just disappear without consequences." She kicked at the snow. "So even though I'm free, my family isn't, and if I go back, if I make trouble, Anna pays the price." They walked in silence for a while, checking traps. Most were empty. It was still early in the season, but one had caught a decent-sized marten, and Colt showed Rhea how to reset it properly. "How much does your father owe now?" he asked as they moved to the next trap. $43, with interest compounding monthly. "At the rate Hale's charging, it'll be $60 by spring. And if they can't pay, Anna goes to work for him. Same contract I had. Same expectations." Colt's hand stilled on the trap mechanism. "We can't let that happen." "We?" Rhea looked at him sharply. "This isn't your fight, Colt. You already did more than anyone had a right to expect. I'm not dragging you into my family's mess." "Little late for that. The minute I bought that contract, I became part of this, whether you like it or not. Hale's going to see me as a threat to his authority. Might as well earn it." "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Hale owns half the valley. The sheriff, the judge, most of the businesses, they're all in his pocket. He's not some small-time rancher you can just outsmart." "Maybe not, but he's also not the only one with resources." Colt finished resetting the trap and stood. "I've been trapping these mountains for 15 years. I know every trail, every hiding spot, every way in and out of this territory. I know other trappers, mountain men, people who don't take kindly to men like Hale throwing their weight around. We're not powerless." Rhea studied him with those sharp, gray-green eyes. "Why are you doing this? Really? And don't give me some line about doing the right thing. Nobody risks everything for a stranger without a reason." "You want the honest answer?" "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." Colt looked out at the mountains, at the endless white expanse of wilderness that had been his home for most of his adult life. "I told you about my mother. What I didn't tell you is that I watched her die slowly, worn down by years of being treated like she was less than human because of how she looked. I was young, useless, couldn't do anything to help her." He turned back to Rhea. "I swore that if I ever had the chance to stop that from happening to someone else, I'd take it. Not for them, really. For her, for the kid I was who couldn't do anything but watch." Rhea didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was softer. "Your mother raised you right, even if your reasons are complicated. Everyone's reasons are complicated. Doesn't make them less real." They continued the trapline, moving through the forest with growing familiarity. Rhea was learning quickly, asking questions that showed she understood the deeper patterns. By the time they headed back to the cabin, she could read sign almost as well as Colt could. That evening, as they sat by the fire cleaning the day's catch, Rhea brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "I need to know what you're carrying," she said, "beyond the debt." Colt looked up from the marten pelt he was scraping. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's the real reason you're up here alone? Most trappers work in pairs or small groups. You've been solo for 3 years. That's unusual." "Maybe I like the quiet. Or maybe you're running from something." She set down her knife. "Look, I don't care what it is. But if we're going to survive up here together, if you're really going to help with my family, I need to know what I'm working with. What happens if your past catches up with you while we're dealing with Hale?" It was a fair question, and she was right. If they were going to trust each other, it had to go both ways. "I killed a man," Colt said quietly. 4 years ago, down in the valley. He was beating a prostitute to death in an alley behind the saloon. I pulled him off her, and he came at me with a knife. We fought, and I killed him. Ria's expression didn't change. Self-defense. That's what I thought. Turned out the man was the son of a territorial judge, rich, connected, the kind of person who matters. And the prostitute? She disappeared the next day, probably paid off or scared off. Without her testimony, it was just me standing over a dead man with his blood on my hands. So you ran? I left before they could arrest me. Came up into the mountains and stayed here. Every few months, someone new moves into the territory, and I think maybe it's someone looking for me. But so far, no one's come. He went back to scraping the pelt. So yeah, I'm running. Not proud of it, but there it is. Ria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The woman you pulled him off of, did she live?" "Yeah, I saw her the next morning before I left. Broken ribs, fractured jaw, but alive." "Then you did the right thing. Everything after that is just consequence." "Easy to say. Harder to live with." "I didn't say it was easy. I said it was right. There's a difference." She picked up her knife again. "We all carry things, Colt. You carry a dead man who deserved what he got. I carry 8 months of humiliation and a sister I couldn't protect. Neither of us is clean, and neither of us is running anymore. We're just trying to survive long enough to fix what we can." They worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, the kind that came from understanding rather than discomfort. 2 days later, a rider appeared on the trail leading to the cabin. Colt spotted him from half a mile away and immediately sent Ria inside. "Stay away from the windows," he said, grabbing his rifle. "This could be nothing, but it could also be Hale's men. I'm not hiding while you face them alone." "You're not hiding. You're being smart. If this goes wrong, you run. There's a trail behind the cabin that leads deeper into the mountains. Follow it for 3 miles until you reach a fork. Take the left path. It'll bring you to a trapper named Samuel Two Bears. Tell him I sent you. He'll help." "Colt, please, Ria. I can handle one rider, but if there's more coming behind him, I need to know you're safe." She looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded and moved away from the door. Colt stepped outside, rifle held casually but ready, and waited for the rider to approach. It wasn't one of Hale's men. It was worse. The man who dismounted in front of the cabin wore a deputy's badge and the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped caring somewhere along the way. He was maybe 40, lean and weathered, with eyes that assessed everything and gave nothing back. "Colt Rayner?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Depends on who's asking." "Deputy Marcus Webb. I'm here on official business regarding a debt contract transfer." He pulled out a folded paper. "You purchased a contract from Dutch Mercer 12 days ago. Contract for 1 Ria Vance. That correct?" "It is." "Well, there's been a complaint filed. Mr. Victor Hale claims the sale was unauthorized and invalid, says Dutch had no authority to sell the contract, and that Miss Vance remains his legal property." Colt's finger moved to the trigger guard of his rifle. "That's interesting, considering I have a signed bill of sale." "Let me see it." Colt didn't move. "You got a warrant to be on my property, Deputy?" Webb's expression didn't change. "I'm here as a courtesy, Rayner, trying to keep this civil. But if you want to make it difficult, I can ride back to town and come back with the sheriff and a half-dozen men. Your choice." Civil would have been Hale accepting that he sold a contract for $1 and moving on with his life. This feels more like harassment. Mr. Hale is a respected businessman. He has rights. So does Ria Vance. Or did those disappear when she refused to share his bed? Something flickered in Webb's eyes. Not quite surprise, but recognition. He'd heard about Hale's reputation then. Probably ignored it like everyone else did. "That's a serious accusation," Webb said carefully. "It's the truth. But I'm guessing the truth doesn't matter much when it comes to men like Hale." Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me the bill of sale." Colt calculated his options. He could refuse, force Webb to leave and come back with reinforcements. But that would just delay the inevitable and possibly escalate things. Or he could cooperate, let Webb see that everything was legal, and hope the man had enough integrity left to accept reality. He made his choice. "It's inside. I'll get it." "I'll come with you." "No, you won't. You'll wait out here like a civilized person, or you can leave right now and come back with that warrant." Webb considered this, then nodded. 5 minutes. Colt went inside where Rhea stood pressed against the wall beside the door, a kitchen knife in her hand. He almost smiled at the sight. She might not have a gun, but she'd armed herself with what she had. "It's Deputy Webb," he said quietly. "Wants to see the bill of sale. Says Hale's claiming the transfer was invalid." "Of course he is." Rhea's grip on the knife tightened. "What are you going to do?" "Show him the paperwork. Hope he's honest enough to accept it." "And if he's not?" "Then we've got bigger problems than one deputy." Colt retrieved the contract and bill of sale from his pack, checking to make sure everything was in order. Dutch's signature was clear, the terms explicit. It might not hold up in a court controlled by Hale, but it was legally binding enough to give Webb pause. He went back outside and handed the papers to the deputy. Webb read them carefully, his expression neutral. "This says Dutch Mercer sold the contract with authorization from Victor Hale," Webb finally said. "That's what it says. But Hale's claiming he gave no such authorization." "Then Hale should take it up with Dutch Mercer. I bought a contract in good faith from someone who represented themselves as having the authority to sell. That's legal and binding." Webb folded the papers and handed them back. "Here's the situation, Rayner. Legally, you might have a case, but practically, Hale owns the judge who'd hear this dispute. You're not going to win in court." "So you're saying the law doesn't matter?" "I'm saying you need to be realistic. Hale wants Miss Vance back, and he's got the resources to make that happen one way or another. You'd be smart to negotiate some kind of settlement before this gets ugly." "Settlement." Colt kept his voice level. "Like what? I give her back and Hale promises not to have his men burn my cabin down?" "I'm trying to help you here." "No, you're trying to help Hale. There's a difference." Colt stepped closer. "You know what he is. What he does to women who work for him. You can't tell me you don't know." Webb's jaw tightened. "What I know doesn't change the reality of power in this valley." "Then maybe it's time someone changed that reality." "You really want to go to war with Victor Hale over a woman you barely know?" "I don't want to go to war with anyone, but I'm not handing her over to a man who'll abuse her, and I'm not backing down because that man has money and connections. So if Hale wants to make this a fight, he can try. But he should know that I'm a lot harder to intimidate than he thinks." Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he mounted his horse. "I'll tell Hale what you said. But don't mistake a warning for a threat, Rayner. Whatever happens next, you brought it on yourself." "Tell Hale one more thing," Colt said. "Tell him that if he comes after Rhea's sister, if he tries to enforce that debt contract against her family, he won't have to worry about courts or deputies. He'll have to worry about me." Webb nodded slowly. "I'll pass that along." He rode away and Colt watched until he disappeared down the trail. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. Rhea emerged from the cabin, still holding the knife. "That could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. What do we do now?" Colt looked at her. This woman who'd been bought and sold, humiliated and discarded, but who still stood ready to fight with nothing but a kitchen knife if that's what it took. "Now?" he said. "Now we prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and we make damn sure that when Hale makes his move, we're ready for him." Rhea nodded, her expression hardening. "Then we'd better get to work." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing the cabin. Colt showed Rhea where he kept his spare ammunition, taught her how to load and fire his rifle, and mapped out defensive positions around the clearing. If Hale sent men, they'd find a fortress, not an easy target. That night, as they sat by the fire cleaning weapons, Rhea spoke without looking up from the rifle she was learning to disassemble. "I need to tell you something else about Hale." "All right." "He keeps records. Ledgers documenting every shady deal, every bribe, every contract manipulation. He's paranoid about being betrayed, so he documents everything as insurance." Colt's hand stilled. "You've seen these ledgers?" "I filed them for 6 months. He thought I was too stupid to understand what I was reading, but I understood plenty. Names, dates, amounts, proof of every illegal thing he's done for the past 10 years. "Where does he keep them?" "In a safe in his office, but there's a problem." She finally looked up at him. "He's not the only one with copies. He sends duplicates to someone else. Someone with power, someone who'd protect him if things went wrong. I don't know who, but it's someone important. So even if we got the ledgers from his safe, we wouldn't have everything." "Right. But we'd have enough to make things very uncomfortable for him. Enough to shift the balance of power, maybe. Colt considered this. You're talking about robbery, breaking into his ranch, cracking a safe, stealing documents. That's serious. I'm talking about survival. About protecting my sister and making sure Hale can't keep destroying people's lives. She set down the rifle. I know it's a lot to ask. You've already risked plenty for me, but if we're going to really stop him, we need leverage. The ledgers are leverage. Even if we got them, using them could backfire, make him more dangerous. Or it could be exactly what we need to force him to release Anna and leave my family alone. Rhea's voice was steady, determined. I'm going after those ledgers, Colt. With you or without you. I'd rather it be with you. Colt looked into the fire, thinking about risk and reward, about the line between justice and revenge, about what his mother would have done in his place. We'd need a plan, he finally said. A good one. And we'd need to know exactly where the safe is, how to open it, and how to get in and out without getting caught or killed. Rhea smiled, fierce and dangerous. I know all of that. I worked there for 8 months, remember? I know the layout, the guard rotations, where Hale keeps the safe combination. I know everything except how to crack a safe. Lucky for you, I spent a summer working for a locksmith before I came to the mountains. I can crack most safes given enough time. Then we've got what we need. Maybe, but we're not doing this tomorrow. We plan carefully, we prepare, and we don't move until we're ready. One mistake and we're both dead or in prison. Agreed. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of what they were planning settling over them. This wasn't just about surviving the winter anymore. This was about taking the fight to Victor Hale, about turning the tables on a man who'd built his power on the backs of people he considered beneath him. It was dangerous, probably stupid, but looking at Rhea's face in the firelight, seeing the determination there, Colt knew they were going to do it anyway. One more thing, Rhea said. When we do this, when we go after Hale, I need to get Anna out too. I'm not leaving her there while we tear his empire apart. We'll get her out. I promise you that. Rhea met his eyes, searching for certainty. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded and went back to cleaning the rifle. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The first real storm of winter was coming. They could feel it in the air, in the way the animals had gone quiet, in the particular quality of the cold. But inside the cabin, plans were being made. Alliances were being forged, and two people who'd been cast aside by a cruel world were preparing to fight back. The mountains were about to learn that some people couldn't be broken, no matter how hard you tried. And Victor Hale was about to learn that the woman he'd tried to destroy had become something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. She'd become someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The storm hit 2 days later, burying the mountains under 3 feet of snow and giving them the cover they needed. Colt used the time to reach out to the men he knew, trappers and mountain folk who lived on the edges of civilization and had their own reasons for distrusting men like Victor Hale. Samuel Two Bears came first, arriving on snowshoes with a rifle strapped to his back and a grim expression that said he already knew why Colt had sent word. He was Shoshone, maybe 50 years old, with hands scarred from decades of trap lines and eyes that missed nothing. "You're planning something stupid," Samuel said by way of greeting, shaking snow off his coat as he stepped into the cabin. "Probably," Colt admitted. Samuel's eyes found Rhea, who was stirring a pot of stew over the fire. "This the woman Dutch was selling?" "Rhea Vance. Rhea, this is Samuel Two Bears, best tracker in these mountains, and one of the few men I'd trust with my life." Rhea nodded acknowledgement. Samuel studied her for a long moment, then turned back to Colt. "Hale's been asking questions. Sent men into the high country looking for you. They're not subtle about it." "How many men?" "6 that I've seen, could be more. They're searching the old trails, checking with other trappers. Someone told them you have a cabin up here." Colt cursed under his breath. "How long before they find us?" "Week, maybe 2 if the weather holds bad. But they'll find you eventually. This isn't something you can hide from forever." "We're not trying to hide forever, just long enough to make our move." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of move?" Colt laid out the plan. Breaking into Hale's ranch, getting the ledgers, freeing Anna. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. You're right, he said when Colt finished. That is stupid, but possible. Possible and smart are different things. Samuel accepted a cup of coffee from Rhea. Hale's got 8 men working security on that ranch, armed, experienced. You're talking about walking into a fortress. We've got advantages they don't. Rhea knows the layout, the routines. I can crack the safe. And if we hit them during the right window, we can be in and out before they realize what's happening. What window? Rhea spoke up. First Tuesday of every month, Hale rides into town for a meeting with the territorial governor's representative. Takes his 2 best men with him, leaves the ranch with reduced security for about 4 hours. It's the only predictable gap in their defenses. Samuel looked at her with new respect. You've been planning this. I've been surviving. Planning comes with the territory. First Tuesday, Colt said. That's in 5 days. We move then, or we wait another month. And I don't think we have another month before Hale's men find this place. Samuel was quiet, considering. Finally, he said, You'll need more than just the 3 of us. Even with reduced security, 8 against 3 are bad odds. You know anyone else who might be interested? Maybe. There's a trapper named Garrett who lost his brother to one of Hale's schemes. And the Donovan brothers have been looking for a reason to make trouble since Hale tried to run them off their claim last spring. Samuel paused. But you need to understand something. These men aren't soldiers. They're not going to follow orders or stick to a plan if things go wrong. They're mountain folk, independent, unpredictable. I'll take unpredictable over outnumbered. Your funeral. I'll send word, see who's willing to ride. Samuel stood. But Colt? This thing you're doing, it's going to have consequences beyond just Hale. You're challenging the whole power structure of the valley. That doesn't end quietly. I know. After Samuel left, Rhea turned to Colt with a hard look. You didn't tell him everything. What do you mean? The part where this isn't just about getting the ledgers and freeing Anna. The part where you're planning to use those ledgers to burn Hale's entire operation to the ground. Colt met her gaze steadily. Would he have helped if I had? Probably not. Samuel's practical. He'd see that as suicide. She crossed her arms. Is it? Suicide? Might be. But half measures don't work with men like Hale. You take him down completely or you don't take him down at all. Anything less, and he'll come back twice as hard. So we're going for broke. We're going for broke. Rhea nodded slowly. Good. I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. If we're doing this, we do it right. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Garrett arrived first. A lean, angry man in his 30s with a scar running down his left cheek and a grudge that burned hot enough to melt snow. His brother had borrowed money from Hale to buy equipment for a mining claim, then died in a suspicious cave-in before he could pay it back. Hale had seized the claim and sold it for 10 times what the debt had been worth. I'm in, Garrett said simply when Colt explained the plan. Whatever it takes to hurt that bastard, count me in. The Donovan brothers came next. Twins, barely 25, with red hair and matching grins that suggested they saw this whole thing as an adventure rather than a suicide mission. Colt wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. We get to shoot at Hale's men? One of them asked. Colt thought it was Patrick, but he couldn't be sure. Only if things go wrong. The goal is to get in and out without a fight. Where's the fun in that? The other brother, probably Michael, said with a laugh. Samuel shot them both a look. You treat this like a game. You'll get everyone killed. This is serious business. We know, Patrick said, his grin fading slightly. But we also know what Hale is. What he's done to people around here. Someone needs to stand up to him, and it might as well be us. By the eve of the first Tuesday, they had 6 fighters total. Colt, Rhea, Samuel, Garrett, and the Donovan brothers. Not an army, but enough to make a difference if everything went according to plan. The problem with plans, as Colt had learned over the years, was that they rarely survived contact with reality. They rode out before dawn, following trails that took them around the main roads and through terrain that most men wouldn't attempt on horseback. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystal clear and brutally cold. Their breath formed white clouds, and ice crystals clung to the horses' manes. Rhea rode beside Colt, her face set with determination. She'd barely slept the night before, but she showed no signs of fatigue. If anything, she seemed more focused than ever, like a weapon finally being aimed at its target. You nervous? Colt asked quietly. Terrified, she admitted. But also ready. Does that make sense? Complete sense. They reached the ridge overlooking Hale's ranch by mid-morning. The spread was impressive, a large main house, multiple barns, bunkhouses for the workers, and corrals that currently held maybe 30 horses. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and Colt could see men moving between buildings. Count them, Samuel said, pulling out a small telescope. Colt did. I see 5. Maybe 6 if there's someone in the main house. Hale and his 2 best men left about an hour ago, Rhea said. I watched from the East Ridge. That leaves his second string, competent, but not as sharp as his main guards. Still 5 against 6, Garrett muttered. Not great odds. We're not fighting all of them, Colt reminded him. We split up. Rhea and I go for the office and the safe. Samuel and Garrett create a distraction on the east side, something that draws attention but doesn't immediately scream attack. The Donovans watch the approaches, make sure no one sneaks up on us. And if it all goes to hell, Michael asked, then we shoot our way out and run like hell was chasing us, because it will be. They split up as planned. Colt and Rhea approached from the south, using a dried creek bed for cover. The ranch had been built for function, not defense, which worked in their favor. There were plenty of blind spots, places where the guards couldn't see without actively looking. The office was in a separate building behind the main house, a smart choice on Hale's part, keeping business away from his living space. Rhea had drawn detailed maps from memory, showing every window, every door, every possible entry point. They reached the building without incident. Rhea tested the back door and found it locked, which they'd expected. Colt pulled out his lockpicks and went to work, his fingers stiff from the cold but still functional. It took him maybe 2 minutes to feel the pins click into place. The door swung open silently. They slipped inside, closing it behind them. The office was exactly as Rhea had described. Desk, filing cabinets, a portrait of some stern-looking ancestor on the wall, and behind the portrait, set into the wall, was the safe. Guard outside, Rhea whispered, peering through the front window. He's at the corner of the main house, about 40 yards away. We've got maybe 3 minutes before he makes his next round. Colt moved to the portrait and swung it aside. The safe was a Herring Hall Marvin, decent quality for its time, but not impossible to crack. He pressed his ear against the door and began working the dial, listening for the subtle clicks that would tell him when each tumbler fell into place. Outside, somewhere to the east, a loud crash echoed across the ranch. Shouting followed, men calling to each other in alarm. That's Samuel, Rhea said, still watching the window. Right on time. The guard Rhea had been watching took off running toward the commotion. 2 others appeared from different buildings, all heading east. The distraction was working. Colt focused on the safe, blocking out everything else. First tumbler fell at 23, second at 41. The third was being stubborn, and precious seconds ticked by as he felt for it. Colt, Rhea said urgently. Someone's coming back. How long? 30 seconds, maybe less. The third tumbler finally clicked. Fourth one came easier. Fifth and final was at 62, and the safe door swung open with a satisfying clunk. Inside were stacks of papers bundled with string. Colt grabbed them all, shoving them into the pack he'd brought. Ledgers, contracts, letters. He didn't have time to sort through them now. He'd take everything and deal with it later. Colt, now! He swung the safe shut, pushed the portrait back into place, and they moved to the back door. Rhea eased it open just as footsteps approached the front of the building. They slipped out and pressed themselves against the wall, barely breathing. The guard passed within 10 feet of them, circling the building. When he reached the front door and found it locked, he seemed satisfied and moved on. Go, Rhea whispered. They made it back to the creek bed and followed it away from the ranch. Behind them, the commotion was dying down. Samuel and Garrett had apparently finished their distraction and were pulling back. They were halfway to the rendezvous point when Rhea grabbed Colt's arm and pointed. There. A small cottage stood apart from the main ranch buildings, almost hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. Smoke rose from its chimney, and Colt could see a figure moving past one of the windows. That's where Anna is, Rhea said. That's where he keeps her. They discussed this possibility. The plan had been to get the ledgers first, then extract Anna on a second run when they had more leverage. But Rhea was already moving toward the cottage, and Colt knew there was no talking her out of it. "Damn it," he muttered, following her. They approached the cottage from the rear. Rhea tried the back door and found it unlocked. She pushed it open slowly, and they stepped into a small kitchen area. The girl sitting at the table looked up with wide, frightened eyes. She was younger than Rhea, maybe 17, with the same auburn hair and sharp features. Bruises marked her arms, and her dress hung loose on a too-thin frame. "Anna," Rhea breathed. Anna's eyes went wide. "Rhea? What are you? You can't be here. If Hale finds out..." "Hale's in town, and we're leaving, right now." "I can't. The contract..." "Forget the contract. I'm not leaving you here." Rhea moved forward and grabbed her sister's hand. "Do you have a coat? Boots?" Anna nodded, still stunned. She grabbed a worn coat from a peg and pulled on boots that had seen better days. "There's a guard. He checks on me every hour." "When was the last check?" "Maybe 20 minutes ago." "Then we've got 40 minutes to get clear. Come on." They left through the back door, moving quickly across open ground toward the creek bed. Colt kept scanning for guards, his hand on his rifle. So far, luck was holding. They'd almost reached cover when a shout went up behind them. Colt turned to see a guard emerging from between two buildings, pointing in their direction. "Run," he said. They ran. The creek bed gave them cover for maybe 100 yards before it petered out into open terrain. Behind them, more shouts erupted. Men were mobilizing, realizing something was wrong. Colt fired a shot over the heads of the pursuing guards, buying them a few seconds as the men dove for cover. Then he was running again, following Rhea and Anna toward the tree line. They crashed into the forest as the first return shots rang out. Bullets snapped through branches above their heads, and Colt heard Anna cry out in fear. "Keep moving," Rhea shouted. "Don't stop." The rendezvous point was a clearing half a mile into the forest. Samuel, Garrett, and the Donovans were already there with the horses, looking tense. "About time," Samuel said, then saw Anna. "Damn it, Colt. We said just the ledgers." "Plans changed. Mount up." They threw themselves onto horses and took off through the forest, following a trail that Colt had scouted weeks earlier. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. More men, more horses, converging on their position. "They're going to catch us," Garrett said, his horse laboring through the deep snow. "Not if we reach the Narrows first," Colt replied. "There's a passage about 2 miles ahead. We can hold them there." They rode hard, pushing the horses as fast as the terrain allowed. Anna clung to Rhea's back, her face buried against her sister's coat. The Donovans whooped and fired shots back at their pursuers, treating the whole thing like the adventure they'd imagined. The Narrows appeared ahead, a gap between two rock faces maybe 10 feet wide, the only easy passage through this part of the mountains. Colt led them through and immediately dismounted. "Samuel, Garrett, take the horses and get these two somewhere safe," he ordered, indicating Rhea and Anna. "The Donovans and I will hold here, slow them down." "I'm not leaving," Rhea said flatly. "Yes, you are. Anna needs you, and those ledgers need to survive. That's more important than holding a defensive position." Rhea looked like she wanted to argue, but Anna's arms tightened around her waist and she relented. "Don't die doing something stupid." "I'll do my best." Samuel and Garrett led Rhea and Anna deeper into the mountains, while Colt and the Donovans found positions in the rocks overlooking the Narrows. They didn't have to wait long. Hale's men came charging through the forest in a group of maybe 8 riders, moving fast and angry. They funneled into the Narrows without thinking, and that was their mistake. Colt fired first, his shot taking down the lead horse. The animal went down screaming, and the riders behind crashed into it in a chaos of tumbling bodies and panicked horses. The Donovans opened up from both sides, their rifles cracking in the cold air. The guards who'd made it through the initial chaos scrambled for cover, returning fire. Bullets pinged off rocks around Colt's position, and he heard one of the Donovans curse as a shot came too close. "Fall back," Colt shouted. "We've bought enough time." They retreated through the rocks, using the terrain to cover their withdrawal. The guards tried to follow, but the narrow passages and unfamiliar ground slowed them down. By the time they organized a pursuit, Colt and the Donovans had disappeared into the wilderness. They caught up with the others 3 hours later at a cave Samuel had prepared as a backup shelter. Rhea had a fire going, and Anna sat wrapped in blankets, looking shell-shocked, but alive. "Everyone accounted for?" Colt asked, doing a quick head count. "All present," Samuel confirmed. Though Patrick took a graze on his arm, nothing serious. Patrick held up his bandaged arm with a grin. "Barely felt it. You should see the other guy." "Did you kill anyone?" Anna asked quietly, looking at Colt. He met her eyes honestly. "I don't know. I killed a horse and I shot to wound, but in that chaos? I can't say for certain." Anna nodded, processing this. She looked at Rhea. "You came back for me." "Of course I came back for you. Did you think I'd leave you there?" "I thought—" Anna's voice broke. "I thought you'd forgotten about me, that you'd moved on and I was stuck there forever." Rhea pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. "Never. I was just waiting for the right moment, for the right help. And now we're both free." Colt opened the pack and spread the documents across a flat rock. Ledgers, just like Rhea had said. Names, dates, amounts. A decade's worth of fraud, extortion, and manipulation documented in meticulous detail. "This is everything?" Samuel asked, leafing through one of the ledgers. "Everything from his office safe," Colt confirmed. "Whether it's enough to bring him down, that's another question." "It's enough to hurt him," Garrett said, his finger tracing down a page. "Look at this. He's been skimming from the territorial tax receipts. That's not just illegal, that's hanging-level illegal if the right people find out." "The right people being the ones who aren't in his pocket," Rhea said. "How many of those are there?" "More than you think," Samuel said. "Hale's powerful in the valley, but he's made enemies. These ledgers give those enemies ammunition." Colt looked at the documents spread before him, feeling the weight of what they'd stolen. This wasn't just about Rhea or Anna anymore. This was about dismantling an entire empire built on cruelty and greed. "We need to get these to someone who can use them," he said. "Someone with the authority and the integrity to act on what's here." "The territorial marshal," Samuel suggested. "Thomas Brennan. He's straight and he's got jurisdiction over everyone, including judges and sheriffs in Hale's pocket." "Where's he based?" "Capital City. 3 days hard ride from here." "Then that's where I'm going." Colt started gathering the documents. "Samuel, can you and Garrett get Rhea and Anna somewhere safe, somewhere Hale can't find them?" "I have a winter camp in the high country. No one knows about it except me and a few trusted friends. They'll be safe there." "I'm going with you," Rhea said. "No, you're not. Your sister needs you, and you need to stay alive to testify if this goes to trial." "Colt's right," Samuel said. "You're a witness to Hale's crimes. You're as valuable as those ledgers, maybe more. Stay with Anna. Stay hidden. Let Colt handle the marshal." Rhea looked like she wanted to fight it, but Anna's hand found hers and squeezed. She sighed. "Fine, but you send word the moment you're back. And if something happens to you, I'm burning that ranch to the ground myself." "Noted." They rested in the cave for a few hours, then split up. Samuel led Rhea and Anna north toward the high country. Garrett and the Donovans scattered to their own territories, ready to spread word of what had happened and watch for Hale's retaliation. Colt headed east toward the capital, riding hard through country that grew less wild with each mile. The ledgers were wrapped in oilcloth and secured in his saddlebags. Every time his horse stumbled, every time he heard hoofbeats behind him, his hand went to his rifle. But the pursuit never came. Either Hale's men had lost the trail, or they'd decided that chasing one man through the wilderness wasn't worth the risk. Colt reached the capital on the third day, exhausted and half frozen. The territorial marshal's office was in a brick building near the courthouse, and Colt walked in looking like exactly what he was, a mountain man who'd ridden through hell to get there. The clerk at the desk looked him up and down with distaste. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Marshal Brennan. It's urgent." "The marshal is a busy man. You'll need to make an appointment." Colt pulled one of the ledgers from his coat and dropped it on the desk. "Tell him I have evidence of territorial tax fraud, extortion, and debt contract manipulation. Tell him it involves Victor Hale and at least a dozen other prominent citizens. And tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 10 minutes, I'm taking this to the newspapers instead." The clerk's eyes widened. He disappeared through a door, and less than 5 minutes later, Colt was sitting across a desk from Marshal Thomas Brennan. Brennan was maybe 50, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much corruption to be shocked by anything. He listened to Colt's story without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Colt finished and laid out the ledgers, Brennan spent 20 minutes reading through them in silence. Finally, he looked up. These are authentic? They came directly from Hale's office safe. The woman who filed them for him can verify their authenticity. And where is this woman? Somewhere safe. Somewhere Hale can't reach her. She'll testify when the time comes, but not before. Hale's already tried to have her killed once. Brennan nodded slowly. You understand what you're doing here. The people named in these ledgers, they're not just criminals. They're judges, sheriffs, businessmen with connections. Going after them will make you a lot of enemies. I already have enemies. Might as well make them count for something. The marshal almost smiled. Fair enough. Leave the ledgers with me. I'll need a few days to verify what's here and build a case. Where can I reach you? Colt gave him the address of a boarding house he'd seen on the way into town. I'll be there for 3 days. After that, I'm heading back into the mountains. 3 days should be enough. If what's in these ledgers is even half accurate, we'll have warrants ready by then. Colt stood to leave, then paused. Marshal, there's a girl involved in this, Anna Vance. Hale's been holding her under a fraudulent debt contract. She's 17 and he's got plans for her that have nothing to do with legitimate labor. When you move on Hale, her safety needs to be a priority. Understood. I'll make sure she's protected. Colt left the office feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The ledgers were in the right hands now. The rest was up to Brennan and the law. He spent 3 days in the capital, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in months, and eating food he didn't have to hunt or trap himself. On the morning of the 4th day, a messenger arrived from Brennan. Warrants had been issued. A federal judge, one not in Hale's pocket, had reviewed the evidence and authorized arrests for Victor Hale and 16 other men named in the ledgers. Marshals were being dispatched to execute the warrants within the week. Colt rode back to the mountains feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It took him a while to recognize it as hope. He found Rhea and Anna at Samuel's winter camp, a collection of sturdy cabins built into a sheltered valley that held warmth better than it had any right to. Rhea saw him coming and ran out to meet him, her face breaking into a smile that made his chest tight. Well, she demanded. It's done. Warrants issued. Marshals moving on Hale within the week. Rhea let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. And Anna? The contract? Brennan's making it a priority. The contract's fraudulent. Any judge who isn't corrupt will throw it out. Your sister's free. Rhea's eyes filled with tears, and before Colt could react, she pulled him into an embrace that nearly knocked him off his feet. She was strong. He'd known that. But feeling that strength used to hold him rather than fight him was different. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for believing me, for risking everything. You did the risking. I just rode the horse. She pulled back, laughing and crying at the same time. You're a terrible liar, Colt Rayner. Anna appeared in the doorway of one of the cabins, and Rhea went to her, taking her hands and telling her the news. Colt watched them embrace, watched the weight lift from both their shoulders, and felt satisfied in a way he hadn't felt in years. They'd fought the power structure and won. They'd stood up to a man who'd seemed untouchable and torn him down. And they'd done it without becoming the kind of people who used cruelty and exploitation to get what they wanted. That night, around Samuel's fire, they celebrated with the few mountain folk who'd helped make it possible. Garrett was there, and the Donovans, and a few others who'd heard the story and wanted to see the women who'd brought down Victor Hale. But Colt found himself sitting apart from the celebration, looking out at the dark mountains and thinking about what came next. The fight wasn't over. Hale would have lawyers, would fight the charges, would try to use whatever influence remained to him. And even if he went down, there would be others like him. There always were. Rhea found him there, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the firelight. You all right? She asked. Just thinking. About? About whether what we did will stick. Whether it matters in the long run. Rhea sat beside him. It matters. Even if Hale walks, even if some judge finds a way to throw out the evidence, we still fought back. We still showed that people like him can be challenged. That matters. You sound sure. I am sure. Because for the first time in 8 months, my sister isn't afraid to fall asleep at night. Because I can breathe without feeling like there's a hand around my throat. Because we took something ugly and turned it into something that might actually help people. She looked at him. That matters, Colt. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. He met her eyes, saw the conviction there, and felt some of his doubt ease. What are you going to do now, when all this settles? I don't know yet. Stay with Anna until she's ready to face the world again. Maybe find work somewhere, save up money, build something that's ours that no one can take away. She paused. What about you? Back to the cabin, I guess. Back to trapping and living alone. Alone? There was something in the way she said it, a weight to the single word that made Colt's heart beat faster. Unless you and Anna wanted to stay, he found himself saying. The cabin's small, but we could build on. Make it big enough for 3. Or 4, if Samuel wants to join us for the winter. Rhea smiled, that fierce, genuine smile he was learning to recognize. You offering us a home, Colt Rayner? I'm offering partnership, a place to live, work to do, people to trust. It's not much, but it's honest. Honest is more than most people get. She extended her hand. Partners, then. He shook it, feeling the strength in her grip, and thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from a solitary trapper avoiding complications to a man with partners, with purpose, with something worth protecting. It wasn't what he'd planned, but sitting there beside Rhea, watching the fire and listening to Anna's laughter mixing with the Donovans' jokes, Colt thought maybe the best things in life were the ones you never planned for. The mountains had taught him to survive alone. These people were teaching him why survival mattered in the first place. And somewhere in the valley below, Victor Hale's empire was crumbling. Justice was slow, imperfect, and often unfair. But sometimes, if you fought hard enough and refused to break, it came through anyway. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow, they'd start building something new. The celebration lasted exactly one night before reality came crashing back. A rider arrived at Samuel's camp before dawn, his horse lathered and trembling. Colt recognized him as one of the trappers who worked the lower valleys, a quiet man named Thomas, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. Marshals moved on Hale yesterday, Thomas said, accepting a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Got him in custody along with 6 others. But there's a problem. Colt felt his stomach drop. What kind of problem? Hale's lawyers are already working. They're claiming the ledgers were stolen property, that any evidence derived from them is inadmissible. And they're saying that since Anna Vance was still under contract when you took her, you committed kidnapping. That's horseshit, Garrett said. The contract was fraudulent. Maybe so, but proving it takes time. And while the lawyers argue, Hale's still got people loyal to him. Word is, they're looking for the girl. Saying if she disappears before the trial, the kidnapping charges go away and the case falls apart. Rhea had gone very still. They're coming after Anna. They're already looking. Hale's men have been riding through every settlement within 50 miles, asking questions, offering money for information. Thomas looked at Colt. You need to move her, somewhere they won't think to look. Anna appeared in the doorway of the cabin, her face pale. I heard. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause more trouble. You didn't cause anything, Rhea said fiercely. This is Hale's doing, not yours. But if you wasn't here, you'd be dead or worse. Don't apologize for surviving. Colt's mind was already racing through options. Samuel's camp was safe for now, but it wouldn't stay that way once Hale's men started searching the high country. They needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere that wouldn't be connected to any of them. I know a place, he said slowly, about 40 miles north across the territorial line. There's a settlement there, mostly Shoshone and a few white trappers who've married into the tribe. They don't have much love for territorial law or the men who enforce it. You think they'd hide her? Samuel asked. I think they'd protect someone who needed protecting, especially if that someone was running from men like Hale. Colt looked at Anna. But it means leaving everything familiar behind. Living in a place where you don't know anyone, don't speak the language, don't understand the customs. Anna's voice was steady despite her fear. Is it safe? Safer than here. And safer than anywhere else I can think of. Then I'll go. Rhea stood. We'll go. I'm not sending her alone. Rhea, you're the primary witness. If you disappear too, I don't care. Anna's my sister. Where she goes, I go. Colt saw the determination in her face and knew argument was pointless. Fine. We leave in an hour. Samuel, can you get word to Marshal Brennan? Let him know what's happening and where we're headed? Already on it. They packed quickly, taking only essentials. Colt loaded extra ammunition and checked his rifle twice. The Donovans volunteered to ride with them as far as the territorial line, providing extra security for the journey. The ride north was tense. Every sound made Colt's hand drift toward his weapon. Every ridge they crested could hide an ambush, but the trail stayed clear, and by nightfall they'd covered 20 miles. They made a cold camp in a rocky hollow, not risking a fire that might give away their position. Anna sat wrapped in blankets, trying not to shiver. She'd been quiet all day, withdrawn into herself. Rhea sat beside her sister, speaking in low tones. Colt couldn't hear the words, but he could see Anna gradually relaxing, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Patrick Donovan settled beside Colt, chewing on a piece of dried meat. You think Hale's men are following us? I think they're trying. Whether they can actually track us through this terrain is another question. What happens if they catch up? We make sure they regret it. Patrick grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. They took turns keeping watch through the night. When Colt's shift came around midnight, he found Rhea still awake, staring up at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. Too much thinking. She patted the ground beside her. Keep me company? He sat, careful to keep his rifle within easy reach. The night was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that made your bones ache. I keep wondering if we did the right thing, Rhea said. Not with Hale. That was definitely right. But dragging Anna into all this. Making her run again when she just got free. You didn't drag her into anything. Hale did that when he decided to use her as leverage. I know. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. She pulled her coat tighter. She was always the gentle one, you know? I was the big sister who could take a hit and keep going. Anna was the one who cried at sad stories and brought home injured birds to nurse back to health. This world isn't built for people like her. Maybe. Or maybe she's stronger than you think. She survived 8 months under Hale's control without breaking. That takes strength. Different kind of strength. Rhea was quiet for a moment. She asked me something earlier. Asked if I thought she'd ever feel normal again. What did you tell her? I told her normal was overrated, that we don't need to be who we were before. We just need to become who we are now. Rhea looked at him. You think that's true? I think people are more adaptable than they give themselves credit for. Your sister's been through hell, but she's still here, still fighting. That counts for something. You're surprisingly optimistic for someone who lives alone in the mountains. Not optimistic, just realistic. I've seen what people can survive when they have to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, mournful, beautiful in its loneliness. Can I ask you something? Rhea said. You going to whether I say yes or not? She smiled. Fair. When this is over, when Anna's safe and the trial's done and Hale's either in prison or dead, what then? What do you want? Colt considered the question. A month ago, he would have said he wanted to go back to his solitary life, to the predictable rhythm of trap lines and seasonal hunting. But that was before Rhea, before Anna, before he'd remembered what it felt like to be part of something larger than survival. I want to build something, he said finally. Not just a cabin, but a real home. A place where people who've been beaten down can catch their breath and figure out what comes next. A place where being different or damaged or difficult doesn't make you worthless. That's a big dream for a trapper. Maybe, but I've got help now, if she's interested. Rhea's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers rough and calloused and warm. She's interested. They reached the settlement 2 days later, exhausted and half-frozen, but alive. The place wasn't much to look at. Maybe 20 structures scattered along a creek, smoke rising from stone chimneys. But the people who emerged to greet them had the kind of steady confidence that came from living on their own terms. An older Shoshone woman approached, her face weathered but kind. She spoke in heavily accented English. Samuel Two Bears sent word, said you needed sanctuary. For her, Colt said, indicating Anna. Men are hunting her, bad men with money and lawyers. The woman looked at Anna for a long moment, taking in the bruises that had faded to yellow-green, the way the girl held herself like she expected to be hit. Something shifted in the woman's expression. I am Mourning Dove. This is my home. She turned to the gathered people and spoke in Shoshone. Several nodded. She turned back to Colt. She can stay. We will protect her. They might come looking. Let them come. This is not their land, not their law. Mourning Dove's smile was sharp. We have dealt with bad men before. Anna stepped forward, her voice small but clear. I don't want to be a burden. Can you work? Yes, ma'am. Then you will not be a burden. Come. You need food, rest. Mourning Dove looked at Rhea. You stay also? Rhea glanced at Colt, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to stay with Anna, but she also knew she was needed elsewhere. As a witness. As someone who'd fought Hale and lived to tell about it. I need to go back, Rhea said quietly. The trial? I'll be okay, Anna interrupted. Rhea, you've been protecting me my whole life. Let these people help now. Let yourself do what you need to do. Anna, please, I'm not asking you to abandon me. I'm asking you to trust me to survive without you for a little while. The sisters embraced and Colt looked away, giving them privacy. When they finally separated, both had tears on their faces. Mourning Dove led Anna toward one of the larger structures. At the doorway, Anna turned back and waved. Rhea waved back, her hand trembling slightly. She'll be safe here, Colt said. I know, doesn't make leaving her any easier. They stayed one night at the settlement, sleeping in a guest lodge that was surprisingly comfortable. In the morning, Mourning Dove gave them supplies for the journey back, smoked fish, pemmican, and a warning. Men came through here 3 days ago, she said. White men, asking about strangers. We told them nothing, but they are looking. Be careful. How many men? 4 that we saw. Could be more. Colt and Rhea left before dawn, the Donovans riding with them. They took a different route back, avoiding the main trails and sticking to terrain that would slow down any pursuit. They were 2 days from Samuel's camp when the Donovans' horses picked up a scent that made them nervous. Michael dismounted and checked the ground, his expression darkening. Riders came through here recently, maybe 6 hours ago, heading in the same direction we are. Could be trappers, Patrick said, but he didn't sound convinced. Could be, or could be Hale's men. Colt scanned the surrounding forest. Either way, we need to assume we're being followed. They picked up the pace, pushing the horses harder than was wise in the rough terrain. As the sun began to set, they spotted smoke rising ahead, too much smoke for a campfire. That's Samuel's camp, Rhea said, her voice tight. They approached cautiously, weapons drawn. What they found made Colt's blood run cold. The main cabin was burning, flames consuming the structure they'd celebrated in just days before. The other buildings were ransacked, supplies scattered across the snow. And in the center of the camp, tied to a post, was Samuel. He was barely conscious, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His hands were bound behind him, and his coat had been stripped away despite the freezing temperature. Colt was off his horse before it fully stopped, running to Samuel with his knife already out. He cut the ropes and caught Samuel as he collapsed. Easy, I've got you. Samuel's eyes focused with difficulty. Hale's men, 8 of them, came looking for the girl. Where are they now? Rode out maybe an hour ago, headed toward the territorial line. They think Anna's still with you. The Donovans had already started beating out the flames, trying to save what they could of the cabin. Rhea brought water and blankets, helping Colt get Samuel wrapped up and warmed. Did you tell them where Anna is? Colt asked. Samuel managed a broken laugh. Told them to go to hell. They didn't like that answer. Samuel, you stubborn fool. Had to buy you time. Had to make sure they went the wrong direction. He gripped Colt's arm with surprising strength. They're planning an ambush, somewhere along the trail to the settlement. They know you'll be coming back this way. How do you know? Because I heard them talking while they were beating me. They're not subtle men, Colt. They think they've got you trapped. Colt exchanged a look with Rhea. Then we spring their trap first. That's suicide, Patrick said. Maybe. But if we don't stop them now, they'll keep coming. They'll eventually find Anna, and everything we've done will be for nothing. Colt stood, his decision made. Besides, I'm tired of running. Time to end this. They left Samuel with supplies and instructions to ride for help if they didn't return in 3 days. Then Colt, Rhea, and the Donovans set out to hunt the hunters. Colt knew this territory better than anyone. He knew where men planning an ambush would set up, high ground with good visibility, a narrow passage that forced riders into a kill zone. There were 3 such spots between here and the territorial line. They checked the first 2 and found them empty. The third was a rocky defile with steep walls on both sides, maybe 50 yards long. Perfect ambush terrain. "They're here," Colt said quietly, reading the subtle signs. Disturbed snow. Horse droppings that were still steaming. The particular quality of silence that came when predators were waiting. "How do you want to play this?" Michael asked. "We don't go through the defile. We go over it." Colt pointed to the ridge on the eastern side. "We climb up, come at them from above, turn their ambush into ours." It took them 2 hours to circle around and climb the ridge, moving slowly to avoid dislodging rocks that would give away their position. By the time they reached the top and looked down into the defile, the sun was setting and Hale's men were getting restless. Colt counted 8, just like Samuel had said. They were positioned on both sides of the passage, rifles ready, watching the southern approach where they expected their targets to appear. "We don't have the high ground everywhere," Rhea whispered. 4 of them are on the opposite ridge. "I know, but we've got surprise, and we've got gravity." Colt checked his rifle. "When I fire the first shot, you all open up. Aim to wound if you can, kill if you have to. The goal is to break their position and send them running. And if they don't run, then we make them wish they had." Colt took careful aim at the nearest man, a large fellow with a scar across his cheek that Colt recognized from Cedar Ridge. One of Dutch Mercer's friends, the kind of man who enjoyed hurting people weaker than himself. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and the scarred man went down clutching his shoulder. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. The Donovans opened fire from their positions, their shots echoing off the rocky walls. Hale's men scattered, trying to find cover that didn't exist. 2 more went down in the first volley. The remaining 5 tried to return fire, but they were shooting uphill at targets they could barely see in the fading light. Rhea's rifle spoke once, twice. Each shot was careful, controlled. Colt saw one of Hale's men drop his weapon and clutch his leg, screaming. "Fall back!" someone yelled from below. "Fall back!" The remaining men scrambled for their horses, dragging their wounded with them. Colt let them go, not interested in slaughter. The point had been made. When the last of them disappeared down the trail, Colt and the others descended into the defile. 3 men lay on the ground, alive but badly wounded. Colt approached the scarred man, who was pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "You're going to ride back to Hale," Colt said quietly. "You're going to tell him that Anna Vance is beyond his reach. Tell him that his ledgers are with the territorial marshal. Tell him that if he sends men after us again, we won't aim for shoulders next time." "Hale will never stop," the man gasped. "You're all dead, you just don't know it yet." "Maybe, but Hale's empire is burning whether he stops or not. The ledgers prove that. All he's doing now is deciding how many people he takes down with him." Colt stood. "Get your men and get out of here, and pray we don't meet again." They watched the wounded men struggle onto their horses and limp away into the growing darkness. When they were gone, Patrick whooped with victory. "Did you see them run? Scared like rabbits." "They'll be back," Rhea said quietly. "Maybe not those men, but others. As long as Hale has money, he'll have people willing to do his dirty work." "Then we'll deal with them too," Colt said. "One fight at a time." They returned to Samuel's camp and found him already working to rebuild what had been destroyed. Other trappers had appeared. Word had spread about the attack, and mountain folk took care of their own. "Heard shooting," Samuel said. "Figured either you won or I'd be attending funerals." "We won, for now. For now's all anyone gets. You did good, Colt." Over the next week, more news filtered in from the valley. The territorial marshal had brought formal charges against Victor Hale and 14 others named in the ledgers. The trials would begin in spring, once the mountain passes cleared enough for witnesses to travel safely. Hale himself was out on bail, confined to his ranch under guard. His lawyers were working overtime, but even they seemed to recognize the evidence was damning. And then, 3 weeks after the ambush in the D-file, a writer arrived with a message that changed everything. Victor Hale was dead. According to the official report, he died of a heart attack in his sleep. But the writer, one of the marshals who'd been guarding him, pulled Colt aside and told a different story. "It wasn't his heart," the marshal said quietly. "Someone got to him. Poison, most likely. Fast acting, leaves few traces. By the time we found him, he'd been dead for hours." "Who?" Colt asked. "Could be anyone. He had enemies all over the territory. Could be someone from his own organization, worried he'd start naming names to reduce his sentence. Could be someone he wronged years ago who finally got their chance. Could even be one of the other men facing charges, eliminating a potential witness." "Will there be an investigation?" The marshal shrugged. "Probably. But between you and me?" Not much enthusiasm for it. A lot of people are breathing easier with Hale dead. Nobody wants to work too hard to find his killer. After the marshal left, Colt told Rhea the news. She received it with mixed emotions, satisfaction that Hale could never hurt anyone again, but also a sense of incompleteness, like a story that ended on the wrong page. "I wanted to face him in court," she said. "I wanted to tell everyone what he did, what he was. Now he's just gone, and people will remember him as a businessman who got caught up in legal troubles. Some people will remember him that way, but the people he hurt? We know the truth. That has to be enough." "Is it?" Colt thought about it. "Yeah, I think it is. Justice isn't always neat and satisfying. Sometimes it's just making sure the bad guy can't hurt anyone else, however that happens." Word was sent to Anna that she could return home if she wanted. With Hale dead and the contracts voided, she was truly free. But Anna sent back a message saying she wanted to stay at the settlement for a while longer, that she'd found peace there and wasn't ready to leave it yet. Rhea accepted this with grace, understanding that her sister needed to heal in her own way and on her own timeline. As winter deepened and the mountain passes became impassable, Colt and Rhea returned to the cabin. True to his word, Colt began building an addition, a second room that would give them more space, more privacy, more room to grow. Rhea worked beside him, her strength making tasks that would have taken Colt weeks alone go much faster. They fell into an easy partnership, learning each other's rhythms and habits. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of construction, Rhea spoke the question that had been hanging between them for weeks. "What are we, Colt, you and me?" He looked at her, this woman who'd been bought and sold and humiliated but had never broken. This woman who'd fought beside him, trusted him, built with him. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I'm better with you than without you, and I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you?" Rhea smiled, that fierce, genuine smile that still made his chest tight. "Yeah, it's enough." Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, burying the world in white silence. Inside, two people who'd been cast aside by a cruel world built something new. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs, built on honesty and respect and the understanding that sometimes the strongest foundations are laid by people who know what it means to fall and get back up. The fight for freedom had been won. Now came the harder work of figuring out what to do with it. But neither of them was afraid of hard work. They'd faced worse than an uncertain future. Together, they could face anything. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought more than just thawing streams and returning birds. It brought visitors. The first was Marshal Brennan himself, riding up to the cabin on a gray mare that looked as tired as he did. Colt and Rhea were working on the new addition when they spotted him, and Rhea's hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. "Easy," Brennan called out, raising both hands. "I come in peace, and with news." They invited him inside, and Colt poured coffee while the marshal warmed himself by the fire. He looked older than when Colt had last seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper. "The trials wrapped up last week," Brennan said. 13 convictions out of 14 defendants. The only one who walked was Judge Morrison, and that was purely because he had enough friends in high places to bury the evidence. "And the others?" Rhea asked. "Prison, various sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The sheriff's badge is being worn by someone new, someone who actually believes in the law. Half the territorial land office got replaced. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. What about Hale's estate? Colt asked. That's actually why I'm here. Brennan pulled out a document. His assets are being liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. Your family is on that list, Miss Vance. The debt your father owed? It's been voided, and you're entitled to compensation for the months you worked under false pretenses. Ria's hands trembled as she took the paper. How much? $340. It's not everything he stole from you, but it's what we could recover. $340. More money than Ria had ever seen in her life. More than enough to start over, to build something real. There's more, Brennan continued. The territorial governor was impressed by your testimony, both of you. He's authorized the creation of a commission to investigate contract labor practices throughout the territory. They want Miss Vance to serve on it. Ria looked up sharply. Me? You understand the system better than anyone. You lived through it, and you're proof that it can be challenged. Brennan leaned forward. I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. A lot of powerful people profit from the current system, and they won't give it up without a fight. But if you're willing to stand up and tell your story, you could help change things for thousands of people. I'm not a politician. I'm not educated or refined or you're a survivor. That's worth more than education. Brennan's voice was gentle. But I understand if you want to refuse. You've already given enough. No one could blame you for wanting to just live your life in peace. Ria looked at Colt, who could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted peace. She deserved peace. But she also had a chance to turn her suffering into something meaningful. How long would it take, she asked. This commission work? Meetings twice a month in the capital. Each session lasts 2 or 3 days. It's a year commitment, maybe 2 if things go well. And I'd have to leave here, leave the cabin. Some of the time, yes, but not permanently. Not unless you wanted to. Colt spoke up before Ria could refuse. Do it. She turned to him. Colt, do it. This is important, and I'll still be here when you get back. He managed to smile. I survived alone for years. I can handle a few days at a time. It's not just a few days, it's weeks, months, maybe years of going back and forth, of digging up everything that happened with Hale and putting it on display for strangers to judge. I know, and I know it'll be hard, but you told me once that we don't need to be who we were before. We just need to become who we are now. So who are you now, Ria? Someone who hides in the mountains, or someone who fights to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others? Ria was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Brennan. I'll do it, on one condition. Name it. Anna serves with me. She deserves a voice in this too, and she's stronger than people think. I'll make it happen. After Brennan left, Ria stood at the window looking out at the mountains. Colt came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. You sure about this? She asked. I'm sure you need to try. Whether it works out or not, you need to know you tried. What if I fail? What if nothing changes? Then you'll have failed trying to do something that mattered. That's better than succeeding at playing it safe. She leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just good at recognizing when someone's about to talk themselves out of something important. 2 weeks later, Anna returned. She rode into the clearing on a sturdy mountain pony, her face tanned and healthy, her eyes clearer than Colt had ever seen them. The months at the Shoshone settlement had changed her. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The sisters embraced for a long time, and when they separated, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. You look good, Ria said, holding Anna at arm's length. Really good. I feel good. Better than I have in years. Anna glanced at Colt. Thank you. For everything you did. For risking so much for someone you didn't even know. You're Ria's sister. That made you worth risking for. Anna smiled, and Colt could see the resemblance between the sisters. The same sharp features, the same gray-green eyes. But where Ria's strength was obvious and physical, Anna's was quieter, deeper. The strength of someone who'd survived by bending instead of breaking. Over dinner, Ria told Anna about the commission, about the opportunity to change the system that had trapped them both. Anna listened carefully, asking pointed questions that showed she'd been thinking about these issues herself. "I'll do it," Anna said finally. "But I have conditions too." "Like what?" Ria asked. "Like we don't just talk about contract labor, we talk about all of it. The way women are treated as property, the way our bodies and our work are valued less than men's, the way being poor means you have no rights. If we're going to do this, we do it right." Ria grinned. "When did my little sister get so fierce?" "I learned from the best." The commission work began in earnest that summer. Ria and Anna rode to the capital twice a month, sometimes staying 3 or 4 days at a time. Colt used the time to expand the cabin further, building not just additional rooms, but a separate structure that could serve as a gathering place. Because people started coming. First, it was just trappers and mountain folk, stopping by to share news or trade supplies. But then others began to arrive. Women fleeing bad situations, men who'd been cheated by powerful employers, families who'd lost everything to corrupt land deals. Word had spread about what Ria and Colt had done to Victor Hale, and people saw them as proof that the powerful could be challenged. Colt had never wanted to run a refuge, but looking at the desperate faces of people who needed help, he found he couldn't turn them away. So the cabin became a way station, a place where people could catch their breath and figure out what came next. Not everyone stayed. Most moved on after a few weeks, equipped with supplies and advice about where to find work or shelter. But some remained, building their own cabins nearby, creating a small community in the high country where the rules of the valley didn't apply. Samuel Two Bears became a permanent fixture, his own camp destroyed, and no desire to rebuild it alone. The Donovan brothers came and went, always ready to help when trouble threatened. Garrett settled nearby with a woman he'd met in town, a widow with 2 children who needed protecting. And through it all, Ria and Anna kept riding to the capital, kept testifying, kept pushing for change. The first real victory came 8 months into the commission's work. A new law was passed requiring all labor contracts to be witnessed by an independent party and registered with the territorial government. It wasn't everything they'd fought for, but it meant men like Hale couldn't trap people in fraudulent contracts without oversight. "It's a start," Anna said the night they received the news. "Not enough, but a start." "Starts matter," Colt said. "Every revolution begins with someone taking the first step." Ria looked at him across the fire, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, of how far they'd both come from that day in Cedar Ridge, when he'd spent his last dollar on a woman the world had deemed worthless. The second victory was more personal. Ria and Anna's parents, who'd been silent throughout the whole ordeal, finally reached out. Their father had been ashamed of taking Hale's money, ashamed of what his daughters had suffered because of his desperation. But with the restitution money and the contracts voided, he'd found the courage to face them again. The reunion was awkward, painful in places. There were things that needed to be said, apologies that needed to be made. But by the end of it, the family was on speaking terms again, and that was something. "He asked me to come home," Anna told Colt later, when Ria was out checking the trap lines. "To come back to the farm and help rebuild." "Are you going to?" "No, I love them, but that life isn't mine anymore. I have work to do here." She paused. "Is that selfish?" "It's honest, and there's nothing selfish about choosing your own path. Ria would go if I asked her to. She'd give up the commission work, give up everything she's built here, just to make me happy." "Probably. But you're not going to ask her to, are you?" Anna smiled. "No, because she's happier here than I've ever seen her, and because she deserves to have something that's just hers, not something she's doing for someone else." Winter came and went again, and the cabin complex grew larger. What had started as Colt's solitary refuge had become a small settlement of maybe 15 permanent residents, with others coming and going as needed. They held meetings every week to discuss community business, settle disputes, plan for the future. Ria usually led these meetings, her natural authority making her the obvious choice for leadership. Colt was content to stay in the background, handling the practical work of keeping everyone fed and sheltered. It was during one of these meetings that a stranger arrived, a well-dressed man on an expensive horse, clearly uncomfortable in the mountain wilderness. "I'm looking for Ria Vance," he said. "I have a message from the territorial governor." Ria stepped forward. "I'm Ria Vance." The man looked her up and down, his expression suggesting he'd expected someone different. Someone smaller, perhaps. Someone more refined. But he handed over the sealed letter without comment. Rhea read it in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up with something like shock in her eyes. They want to appoint me as the Territorial Commissioner for Labor Rights. It's a paid position, official authority to investigate complaints and prosecute violations. That's incredible, Anna said. It means living in the capital, full-time, taking on the people we've been fighting against and making it my entire life. Colt felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd known this was coming, eventually. Rhea was too capable, too passionate to stay hidden in the mountains forever. The world needed people like her, in positions of authority. But that didn't make the thought of losing her any easier. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. Rhea looked at him, and he could see her struggling with the same conflict he felt, duty versus desire, the chance to help thousands of people versus the life they'd built together. "I don't know," she admitted. "I need to think about it." She took 3 days to make her decision. 3 days of long walks through the forest, of quiet conversations with Anna and Samuel and others whose opinion she trusted. Colt didn't push, didn't try to influence her. This had to be her choice alone. On the third evening, she found him working on a new structure, a schoolhouse for the children who'd started appearing in their small community. "I'm not taking it," she said without preamble. Colt set down his hammer. "Why not?" "Because I've spent my whole life having other people tell me what I should do, what I should be, how I should use my body and my strength, and I'm done with that. The commission work is important, and I'll keep doing it as long as they'll have me, but I'm not giving up this life, this place, these people. I'm not giving up what we've built." "Rhea, this is a chance to what? Save the world?" "I'm not interested in saving the world, Colt. I'm interested in saving the piece of it I can actually reach. These people here, they need someone who understands what it's like to be powerless, who can help them find their own strength instead of just imposing more rules from above." She stepped closer. "And I'm interested in building a life with you. Not a life where I'm gone 8 months out of the year and you're just waiting for me to come back. A real partnership where we wake up together and work together and figure out this whole mess together." Colt felt his throat tighten. "You sure? You don't think you'll regret it?" "I'm sure I'd regret taking it more. I'm not the person I was when you bought that contract, Colt. I'm not the woman who needed rescuing. I'm someone who knows her worth now, who knows what she wants, and what I want is here." He pulled her into his arms, and she held him just as tightly. Around them, the community they'd built went about its evening business, children playing, adults preparing dinner, someone tuning a fiddle for the music that would fill the gathering hall later. This was what they'd fought for. Not just freedom from men like Hale, but freedom to choose their own paths, to define their own worth instead of letting others do it for them. "So what do we do?" Colt asked. "Just keep building this place? Keep helping people who show up?" "That's exactly what we do. And maybe we formalize it, create an actual charter for the settlement, establish rules and guidelines so it can survive beyond just us." Rhea pulled back to look at him. "We build something that lasts, Colt, something that proves people like us, people the world tries to throw away, have value, that we can create something beautiful out of the ruins they tried to bury us in. That's a tall order. Good thing we're both used to hard work." The territorial governor accepted Rhea's refusal with grace and appointed someone else to the commissioner position, a lawyer from the capital with good intentions but no personal experience with the system he was meant to reform. Rhea stayed on the commission in an advisory role, making her twice-monthly trips to share her expertise while maintaining her life in the mountains. Anna, surprisingly, accepted a position with the new commissioner's office. She'd discovered she had a talent for investigation and documentation, for building cases that could withstand legal challenges. She split her time between the capital and the settlement, bringing back news and resources from the wider world. Their parents visited once, briefly. The gap between them hadn't fully healed and probably never would. But there was peace now, an understanding that they'd each chosen their own paths and could respect each other from a distance. 2 years after that first meeting in Cedar Ridge, Colt and Rhea stood in the gathering hall of their settlement, now officially chartered as Refuge Creek, and spoke vows in front of the community they'd built. Samuel performed the ceremony, blending Shoshone traditions with the practical simplicity that suited them both. Rhea wore a dress she'd made herself, sturdy and practical, but beautiful in its simplicity. Colt wore the same coat he'd worn that day in the square, mended and cleaned but fundamentally unchanged. "You look like a trapper," Rhea said with a smile. "You look like someone who could break me in half if I get out of line." "Good. Keep that in mind." The celebration lasted well into the night. The Donovans played music, Garrett and his wife provided enough food to feed everyone twice over, and even Marshall Brennan made an appearance, having ridden 3 days to attend. Late in the evening, when most people had drifted off to their own cabins, Colt and Rhea sat outside the gathering hall watching the stars. "You think this will last?" Rhea asked. "What we've built here?" "Nothing lasts forever, but I think we've created something strong enough to survive us, and that's about all anyone can hope for." That's surprisingly philosophical for someone who used to live alone and avoid people. "I had a good teacher." He took her hand. "You changed me, you know. Made me remember that isolation isn't the same as safety. That sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to stand with other people. You changed me too. Showed me that being strong doesn't mean facing everything alone. That accepting help isn't weakness." She leaned against him. "We make a pretty good team. Best investment I ever made. Still going on about that dollar? Always will. Best dollar I ever spent." Over the next decade, Refuge Creek grew into a thriving community of over 60 permanent residents. The schoolhouse Colt had started building became a reality, with Anna teaching children who might otherwise have grown up illiterate. A trading post was established, drawing trappers and merchants from across the territory. A blacksmith set up shop, then a cooper, then a woman who made the best bread anyone had ever tasted. The Commission on Labor Rights, bolstered by the evidence Rhea and Anna continued to provide, succeeded in passing more comprehensive reforms. Contract labor wasn't abolished, that would take another generation, but it was regulated strictly enough that the worst abuses became rare. Men like Victor Hale still existed, of course. Power always attracted people willing to abuse it. But now there were mechanisms to fight back, official channels that didn't require heroes to risk everything just to see basic justice done. Rhea and Colt never had children of their own. Between the work of maintaining the settlement and Rhea's ongoing commission duties, there simply wasn't time. But they raised dozens of children nonetheless, kids who came to Refuge Creek scared and broken and left stronger for having known them. Some of those children stayed, building their own cabins and families within the community. Others moved on to create new settlements modeled on what they'd learned. The idea spread, safe places where people could go when the world became too cruel, where your worth wasn't measured by your appearance or your ability to submit. Samuel lived another 15 years before a bad fall while checking traps finally did what age and hardship hadn't managed. He died in his sleep, surrounded by people who loved him, and was buried on the ridge overlooking the settlement. Rhea carved his marker herself, her strong hands shaping the wood into something beautiful and lasting. The Donovans eventually settled down with women who could match their energy, producing children who were just as wild and just as loyal. Garrett's family grew, his wife's 2 children bringing their own families to live nearby. And through it all, Colt and Rhea worked side by side, building, creating, protecting. They fought sometimes, both too stubborn for their own good, but they always found their way back to each other. On their 10th anniversary, Rhea looked around at the community they'd created and said something that Colt would remember for the rest of his life. "You know what the best part is? None of this happened because we were perfect. It happened because we refused to accept that being broken meant being worthless. We took all the damage and all the pain, and we built something beautiful anyway." Colt looked at the woman beside him, still strong, still fierce, still carrying herself like someone who knew exactly what she was worth. The world had tried to destroy her, had put her on an auction block and laughed at her body and her strength. But she'd survived anyway, and more than that, she'd thrived. "You were never broken," he said, "just bent. There's a difference. We were both bent, but we straightened each other out." Years later, when Colt was old and gray and his trapping days were long behind him, he would sometimes sit on the porch of the cabin, expanded now into a proper house with multiple rooms and real glass windows, and watch the settlement go about its business. He'd see children playing in the square where the gathering hall stood. He'd see traders arriving with goods from the valley, treated with respect instead of suspicion. He'd see people working together to build something new, to help a neighbor in need, to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. And he'd remember that day in Cedar Ridge, the woman on the platform with a sack over her head, the laughter of cruel men who measured worth in inches and pounds, the moment he decided to spend his last dollar on something that mattered. People sometimes asked him if he regretted it, if he ever wished he'd kept his money, kept his solitude, kept himself separate from the complications that came with caring about other people. He never did. Not once. Not even for a moment. Because that dollar had bought him more than just a contract. It had bought him purpose, partnership, a family that wasn't defined by blood but by choice and commitment and the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth. Rhea joined him on the porch, moving slower than she used to, but still carrying that unmistakable strength. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That auction. The day we met." "Still? After all these years?" "Can't help it. That was the day everything changed. For both of us." She took his hand, her palm rough and calloused from decades of work. "You know what I remember most about that day? Not the humiliation or the laughter. I remember looking down and seeing one person who didn't think I was worthless, one person who saw something worth saving. You saved yourself. I just gave you the chance. We saved each other." She squeezed his hand, "and then we saved a whole lot of other people along the way." Colt looked out at Refuge Creek, at the community they'd built from nothing but determination and a refusal to accept the world's judgment of their worth. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still problems, still challenges, still moments when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart. But it endured. Because they'd built it on a foundation strong enough to weather storms. Because they'd taught others to do the same. Because they'd proven that the people society discarded often had the most to offer if someone just gave them the chance. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the settlement, someone started playing music. Children's laughter carried on the wind. The smell of dinner cooking drifted from a dozen different cabins. This was what they'd fought for. This moment of peace and purpose and belonging. And it had all started with one man refusing to laugh, one woman refusing to break, $1 spent on the radical notion that everyone deserves dignity. The world that had judged Rhea by her body had been forced to see her true strength. She hadn't changed to fit their expectations. She'd changed the outcome entirely. And Colt hadn't rescued a woman in need. He'd stood beside a woman who refused to be broken, and together they'd built something stronger than either could have managed alone. That was worth more than any amount of money. That was worth everything. As the stars began to appear overhead, Colt and Rhea sat in comfortable silence, watching their community settle in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people needing help, new battles to fight. But tonight, they could rest. Tonight, they could simply be two people who'd found each other against all odds and created something beautiful from the wreckage of their past. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to what had been built in their shadow. And in the gathering darkness, Refuge Creek glowed with warmth and light, a beacon for anyone who needed to know that they weren't alone, that they had worth, that someone would stand beside them when the world tried to tear them down. This was their legacy. Not perfection, but persistence. Not salvation, but solidarity. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a real life built with real people, proving every day that strength comes in all forms and worth is measured by what you build, not what others tear down. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.